It should be good.
Perfect. Okay. Well, welcome everyone officially to our next Great Lakes Nature-Based Coastal Solutions Community of Practice meeting. We're very thankful that everyone was able to take time from their very busy schedules to join us today. I only have a few points to cover before we dive into the main talks for today. And we do have a really good lineup, so I don't want to take too much time away from our speakers. As always, the Great Lakes chapter acknowledges the diversity of Indigenous peoples within the land that we now call Canada, and we value the historical and contemporary contributions of these peoples in the regions where we work. In particular, we recognize the importance of Indigenous ways of knowing to our understanding of the natural world. We encourage each and every one of you to reflect on where you live and where you work and how we can continue to contribute to reconciliation. Now, some of you may remember during our very first COP meeting way back in February that we touched on a few topics to explore and objectives to work towards as a community. The objectives that we talked about were creating regional resource and networks, participating and providing a voice for the Great Lakes COP at larger conference settings, contributing to multinational initiatives and facilitating knowledge transfer, and of course, organizing these regular gatherings of cross-sector professionals. Our COP has continued to grow, and as that's happened, the executive team has continued to refine our overall goals with the National Committee, and we do want to now revisit what our key short, medium, and long-term objectives should be with everybody. And again, I'll reiterate, I don't want to take too much time away from our speakers today by diving into this conversation right now, but I do want to bring it to everyone's attention to have you all start thinking about what you want to see as specifically our Great Lakes chapter's short, medium, and long-term objectives. By short term, we're talking 2024, medium term, 2025, and long term, starting in 3 or more years from now. So just putting it out there to look out for a follow-up email where you can share all of your ideas and your feedback about what the Great Lakes chapter objective should be. The executive committee here will compile all of your responses and we'll share it with the other regional chapters and the national committees. With that kind of out of the way and taken care of, I do want to introduce all of our speakers today before we get into it. Following each one of the presentations, we'll go through a question and answer session where you can either unmute yourself if you have that ability today and ask your question directly to our speaker, or you're also welcome to put your question into our chat where I can ask for them. If we don't get to all of the questions, if there's extra time at the end, we can always go back, but we'll get to as many as we can today. So again, I'll introduce all of our speakers and then we'll dive into our first talk. So originally, Scott Baker was going to be our first presenter. He is having some mic issues, so I'll still introduce him first, but we'll go in a different order than was planned, I suppose. So Scott Baker from National Research Council will be speaking on the Scarborough Waterfront project today, which aims to create a system of naturalized spaces along Lake Ontario and will balance waterfront revitalization and public access with natural heritage and natural hazard protection and management. We also have Pete Zuzek today from Zuzek Inc. discussing the Coastal Resilience Framework and how it's changing the coastal management narrative to focus on preserving and restoring natural shorelines while also promoting nature-based solutions. And our final talk today is from Jenny Gharib from Essex Region Conservation. She'll be speaking on the restoration of Hillman Marsh, which aims to restore and enhance the barrier beach and the wetland plant community that it protects, while also creating community co-benefits. Now, originally, like I said, it was going to be Scott, but we are going to start our conversation today off with Pete. So with that, I will hand it over to Pete. Sorry, Pete, you're just muted there.
Mute, okay. To slideshow here. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for coming and listening today, and we'll look forward to getting your feedback here. That, as mentioned, the talk today is entitled Development of a Coastal Resilience Framework, Lake Erie North Shore Pilot. Just some context here, this is a contract that Coastal Zone Canada, it's a contribution agreement received from Environment Canada and myself, Linda Morch and Larry Hildebrand been working on. Very much a draft right now in progress, and we've been focusing the development of the framework to date on some of the lessons learned from the North Shore of Lake Erie. I should also just mention that this talk and the work on the framework is pulling in a lot of work from many years and multiple agencies. So there's lots of contributors and lots of thoughts from various aspects of the Great Lakes coast. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the need for a resilience framework in the Canadian side of the Great Lakes, and then shift into the draft coastal resilience framework. And want to just stress that at this point, these are the perspectives of the consulting team as we've been developing this work with the think tank, but these are not government endorsed plans yet. And then finally, I'll take any questions and have some discussion at the end. So first of all, why do we need an integrated coastal resilience framework? And a lot of work has been going on in the North Shore Lake Erie, which is what's driving this pilot work. The goal ultimately is to branch out with this framework to cover all the Canadian sides of the lakes. But some of the key things we've learned here on the North Shore of Lake Erie, over 90% of the coastal wetlands are located in three places: the Long Point Sandspit, Rondo, Point Pelee Peninsula. And these areas are under tremendous stress from reductions of sediment supply, which are impacting barrier systems, beaches, coastal wetlands, etc. And one of the things that's been well documented through a whole host of studies has been the impacts of impaired coastal processes on geodiversity and biodiversity. And what do we mean by that? First of all, shoreline armoring has dramatically reduced sediment supply along these the North Shore of Lake Erie. Harbors have disrupted alongshore sediment transport. We also have serious threats to geodiversity, which is biodiversity's silent partner. And collectively, through, again, a number of different studies, including Greg Main's coastal wetland work, various other pieces of work, we've now been able to document over 1,000 hectares of lost coastal wetlands in these three locations, Long Point, Rondo, Hillman. And that's not consistent with our goals in the Great Lakes. It's not consistent with the goals and objectives of the Habitat and Species Annex of the Water Quality Agreement, which calls for net habitat gain. So we have a problem that we need to fix. We also know that climate change is increasing our threats to coastal communities and infrastructure. We're looking at all the best science, and we see that higher lake levels are projected in the future when we have wet periods like we had in 2019. We know that our ice cover has decreased dramatically and will continue to decline in the Great Lakes. Winter wave energy could almost double, increase 100% if we get to an ice-free winter condition on Lake Erie in the long term. And winter flooding events will be more frequent, shorelines will erode faster, and beach resilience will decrease without interventions. From the work we've been doing with NRCan on a contract, delving into why do we have some of these challenges, and coastal governance comes to the forefront. So the diagram on the right, top right, we have a schematic talking about our siloed approach to legislation, governance, and management. We have a ministries responsible for fish and birds, separate departments responsible for navigation and ports. We have a whole host of different people working on protected areas, and it's not integrated. Things are not always integrated, I should say, could be better integrated. And consequently, one of the reasons that we're seeing the decline in resilience, biodiversity, geodiversity, ecological health is due to this lack of integration across our governance structure. And so from this work from NRCan, and the report is posted at the link there on the bottom, we've identified this pathway decision. We're watching species decline. We're watching all our natural areas being impacted. We have important decisions to make, and what we're documenting in this report with NRCan is the fact that if we take a new approach and we focus more on integrated governance, integrated coastal climate change adaptation, we can change this system response and start focusing more on increasing resilience and increasing our integration of these physical systems. If we don't, however, that trajectory of decreasing resilience, biodiversity, geodiversity is going to continue. We're going to continue to see losses. Okay. So onto the framework, and then this is where we'll sort of start to touch on some of the linkages to nature-based coastal solutions and this community of practice. Again, this draft coastal framework, the information that's been generated to date has been put together with a think tank that represents various sectors of government, ENGOs, conservation authorities, but the views right now are those expressed of the consulting team. In other words, this is a work in progress. And so this framework, at its highest level, we see two key components. And the first is a need for some lake-wide governance. We're calling it a Lake Resilience Council. Again, we'll touch a little bit more on this later, but we need some overarching structure, some governance approaches. We need to link things together, set goals, et cetera. And so that's one aspect of the framework. The second is focusing on integrated littoral cell resilience plans. And so think about these as somewhat similar to our shoreline management plans, but those plans are really focused primarily on planning, land use planning, and hazards. The goal here is to take all of society approach, an integrated approach with these types of plans, and not just focus on single things like hazards. And so that's the scale of action, and we'll touch on that in a few moments. So first of all, with resilience, we've got three pathways that we're talking about that we're all probably quite familiar with: resistance, our ability to withstand disturbance; recovery, our ability to bounce back from disturbances; and most importantly, and maybe most interestingly, transformation. And I think this is where the thoughts and the ideas that are coming out of the nature-based coastal solutions community of practice can really flourish and find a home within this framework and help us understand how we can create better places in the future. All right, and we have a definition for resilience, which is on the website. Won't go through this in word for word, but obviously recognizing we have an integrated system of social, economic, environmental systems. Again, their ability to bounce back, maintain our structure, but most importantly, maybe down at the end here, building capacity to learn from these events, develop innovative and equitable adaptation solutions and transformation. And these concepts are highlighted in JOCM, where we have obviously resistance if we can withstand a hazardous event. We have our goal here, I guess, of recovering and bouncing back, the dashed dot line. But ultimately, where we really want to be in our sweet spot is transformation, transformational adaptation, where we not only can recover from events, but we can increase resilience and increase the overall health of these coastal ecosystems. And I think, again, that's where on a larger scale, that ideas around nature-based coastal solutions have a real opportunity to flourish here in the framework. As far as the geographic extent, we're speaking about areas impacted by lake level fluctuations. So we're talking about the nearshore environment, river mouths, creeks and streams, et cetera, to the extent that lake levels influence the shoreline evolution or the processes in those systems. So we're definitely not talking upper watershed, and we're not talking about the deep lake or the offshore, but we're talking about that land and water interface in that physical system and that geography. The other part of this framework that's really critical is scale, and littoral cells are a defining aspect of this framework and a critical organizing aspect of the framework, in that they define the sediment sources, sand and gravel, transport pathways, and ultimately depositional environments. If we're going to work at these regional scales and make improvements to coastal resilience, we have to understand the sediment dynamics, these physical systems that are operating at the scale of littoral cells. And we have not always done that in the Great Lakes. It's either been shoreline management plans that don't always line up with these boundaries, and in many, many cases, though, at much, much smaller scales. And if we go into zoom in too close to a problem or to a situation, we run the risk of not being able to fully comprehend our downdrift impacts, adjacent impacts, et cetera. So again, scale is a defining aspect. And in most cases, we're recommending focusing on littoral cells where they're relevant, or large regional areas. Some of the other key principles, touched on it already a bit, but the Great Lakes are an integrated system. This land-water interface, this coastal area, has social dynamics, economics, biodiversity, geodiversity. And when we go into our solution space to look for opportunities to increase resilience and improve ecological health and people's livelihoods and our economy, we have to be thinking about all of these dimensions. And far too often in the past, we've focused on only single aspects, the economic activity of a region, or focusing just on biodiversity conservation, not thinking about geodiversity and the supply of sediment to barrier ecosystems, for example. So really critical that we recognize that the coastal area and these littoral cells are these integrated systems, and we have to respect and operate under all of these as we work through the framework. And another concept that's really important and we're talking a lot about is by everyone, for everyone. And so the coastal resilience framework requires an all of society approach. This is not just senior levels of government. It's not just municipalities and conservation authorities, for example. And it's certainly not just landowners on their own. This is about everyone coming to the table to recognize that they're part of these physical systems and that they need to work together to develop solutions. Of course, First Nations as well, businesses, et cetera. So that's another really important framing concept. And if I make reference to shoreline management plans that we develop now, they do lots of good things for hazards, for example, but they don't take that broad perspective of all of these aspects of our coastal system. And that's something that we're promoting with the framework. So this graphic from the report, again, it speaks to the need for some lake-wide governance. We need to have leadership at the lake scale. We're calling this the Lake Resilience Council, playing a coordinating role with the framework implementation. And then we have a series of steps here that you could work through in this framework, including discernment, working on resilience needs, supporting plan development, reviewing plan outputs, and then assessing outcomes against goals. So some steps in this lake-wide function, and all of that would be wrapped up in an adaptive management loop. And then we get to the littoral cells, where we see developing integrated littoral cell resilience plans. And obviously that needs to have some organization and governance in the form of a committee at the top, and that committee would need to have representation from all of society, not just government, not just local, not just CAs, but having all of the actors in the coastal area involved. And then we have a series of steps here, draft steps that have been developed, including engaging and assessing vulnerability in the coastal system, moving to step 2, which would be developing plans to deal with these challenges. Step 3 would be taking action to implementing projects, followed by step 4, which would be evaluating outcomes. How did we do? Did we reach our targets? Are we finished? Is there work to be done? Of course, there's always more work to be done. And so these plans really should be living documents. They're not one-offs. They need to have a life, and they need to have a continuum and learn as we progress. And then almost at the end here, again, back to the linkages with nature-based solutions. We've been working on this PARA framework for a number of different projects, refining this along the way. PARA that we're calling now is sort of a spin-off of the old PARA framework by Doberstein. And we've expanded this and created a hierarchy. And so when we're managing the coast and we're looking for solutions to disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, or building resilience in our coastal environments, we see this hierarchy of the PARA framework as something really important to follow. And as just walk you through, I guess, 1 to 6, at the very top, preserving natural coastal areas, it should always be our first priority because we know nature is resilient to hazards. So that's the first thing we should always do. Avoiding development on hazardous lands. We have policies for that, yet it still happens, unfortunately. So again, let's not make more problems in our coastal environments. Retreating from hazards is something that is happening, will continue. to happen. It's often the cheapest approach to mitigate risk when we don't have large municipal assets, for example. Realigning land uses can also create all kinds of co-benefits by de-risking areas, creating resilience through nature-based solutions, for example. Accommodating natural hazards is often an option. The fifth here is restoring the coastal areas with nature-based coastal solutions. And then the fifth or sixth option in this hierarchy is hardening with engineering structures. And so I think hopefully it's pretty apparent to everyone on the call here that this is quite a shift from where we were 30, 40 years ago when our go-to manual was the shore protection manual that the Army Corps developed. That had a life many, many decades ago, and now the Corps is actually leading changes with nature-based solutions. So we've changed, and instead of hardening with engineering structures being the first thing we do when we have a problem in this hierarchy, it's the last thing that we turn to after we exhaust all options for nature-based coastal solutions. So I think that's it. It's a quick tour. There was a couple links in the slide deck. We can certainly make the slides available. And I guess what we're trying to do, Brianna, more than anything here through the presentation is just highlight how this framework can hopefully change how we think about managing our coastal areas in the Great Lakes and the role that nature-based solutions can play. So that's it for me. I'm happy to have any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Pete, for sharing the coastal resilience framework with us. I think the issue of disconnected groups trying to solve the same problem is something that us all on the call here are all very aware of. And this sounds like a really great step in the right direction. I do want to open the floor. I have a couple questions that I'll hold off for to let everyone else have a chance. If you have a question and you'd like to share it with your mic, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you, or please send your question into the chat for Pete and we'll go through those one by one. I suppose while people are thinking, I'll go ahead with one of my questions I had for you, Pete. With this integrated system that you're talking about with the resiliency framework, you of course need that multidisciplinary team that you touched on. Can you speak to any challenges or barriers you had when trying to determine how to create this everyone for everyone mindset or team when you were developing this framework? That's not an easy task, I think.
No, great question. I guess just to reiterate, this is very much a work in progress. There is a draft report that the consulting team has put together, and there is a think tank again with members across government that are providing their feedback. But this is not an endorsed government product yet. So a lot of this is still work in progress. And one of the things that we're working on right now, and we're going to focus on the Pelee Peninsula a bit with a case study, is getting down to our boots on the ground and working with a local committee to learn about how should this work. We've had quite a bit of discussion at the senior levels of government about this framework, but what we haven't done is really get down to boots on the ground and get into a littoral cell and strike a committee and talk to people about what are your challenges, what are your values, how can this framework work for you to help improve your resilience. And so that's still that's just ongoing, I guess, as we speak. And there's still lots of learning to be done there. So I don't want to suggest that we've got it all figured out yet. We have not. There's a lot of really important voices, including landowners and stakeholders and the First Nations that are still going to chime in on this framework. So this is critical aspect of it, and I don't think we have it all figured out yet, other than broadly saying we need everybody on board for this.
Right. I think that's fair to say. And maybe my follow-up question to this is going to be the same response, is that it's a work in progress, but is the idea with the framework that it would be site specific and there might be different goals or objectives for each area that might have different issues regionally, or would it be more of an umbrella framework that would encompass all of the Great Lakes at a more broader stance?
That's a great question. So the contract, as was sort of was focused on the North Shore of Lake Erie. of course, Canada has we have much larger Great Lakes coast than that. The framework is meant to be flexible and adaptable, and then there's many people, including some on the call here, who have been really promoting the importance of let's break out of Lake Erie and make sure we talk about all the rest of our Great Lakes coast on the Canadian side. And that's very very important. I think where the customization comes in, as you highlight, might be at the lake scale. Issues on Lake Erie might be different than the issues on Lake Superior. And so certainly when you set up a lake scale committee to establish priorities, objectives, they might be different basin to basin. And then further, when you get down to working on a resilience plan within a littoral cell or a defined large region, again, you may have different issues and concerns, maybe nearshore water quality on Lake Erie or sediment supply. You turn somewhere else, and it could be a different set of objectives or challenges that the community are facing. So very much we want it to create a framework, but we want people to be able to customize their littoral cell resilience plans based on their issues and their values and their communities in these littoral cells and in the large regional areas.
Great. Thank you for addressing my broad scale questions when it's very much in its infancy. I appreciate you taking a stab at that, and it all makes a lot of sense to me. We do have a few questions coming in from the chat. The first one, going back to this idea of the multidisciplinary team, what would you be looking for in a multidisciplinary team? Like what skill sets or what perspectives would you want to include in that?
Well, we're lots of them. Obviously we're focused on the coastal area. We've highlighted that we need to be thinking about these challenges from the dimension of social values, economy, physical systems, and then the environment and ecological systems. So too much of what is done, and not always, I don't want to sound like we're always doing things wrong, because there's lots of success stories out there, but there's been a lot of past work where we've been too focused on one or two dimensions of this integrated physical system. So I would see teams, obviously we need to have physical scientists, we need to have economists, we need to have biologists and ecologists, we need to have people that have insights into social values and health and the full gamut. We need to have businesses that say, hey, I'm trying to eke out a living here on the coast, and these are the things that are important to me. And we need to have stakeholders, landowners as well, people that go, say, to a provincial park, or they go to a national park because they don't have with their own waterfront access. They need to have a voice too. And there's lots of places where these protected areas are under tremendous stress because of actions being taken elsewhere. So, it's really important to have give everyone a voice and have a very broad multidisciplinary team.
Right, very much so. We have a few more questions here, and I just want to get to them while we have some time. So the next one is, how do you foresee an approach that prioritizes littoral cell thinking functioning within the context of Western property rights-based laws and policies that currently govern the Great Lakes shorelines?
That's a hot potato there too. Yeah, I think that a key aspect of what we're trying to do here is bring the landowners forward and be central to these plan developments. And I myself, many years of working away at this, far too often in the past, we bring in the stakeholders near the end and say, here's our ideas, what do you think? And we realize that often doesn't work very well. So we want to turn that around and bring the landowners forward and bring them onto these committees from day one. And they need to tell us what the values are of the community and what they care about, and drive the action together and co-develop solutions. So I think we're really, it's never going to be easy, first of all. and it may be more successful in some geographies than other. But we need to bring people to the table that are the private landowners and give them a voice, and we need to listen, and we need to find solutions that are going to work for them and work for the broader objectives.
Great, thank you for that response. And one more kind of in line with land ownership we'll give you before we jump on to the next presenter. This question is, as a landowner who wants to build a cottage in an area designated as a wetland in Chatham-Kent, what resources are available to help with preserving the coastline?
Well, I think with that one, you really want to start communicating with the Conservation Authority, and they're going to be able to identify where the wetland extents are, where they're mapped to, and that will influence what kind of building footprint that you have. And I think they're your first go-to persons to get some initial feedback.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Pete, very much for addressing all of these questions while in the very preliminary stages of your framework, but I think we're all very excited to see where this goes in the next few stages. If anyone has any other questions that come up for Pete, feel free to put them in the chat, and if we have time at the end of the webinar, we can always go back to them, or we can address them via email if Pete has a chance to respond to those later. But to keep with time, I do want to pass it on to our next presenter, Jenny Gharib from Essex Region Conservation. Jenny, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and share and have your presentation.
There we go. Is this coming up okay?
Looks good.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Bree. My name is Jenny Gharib, and I'm the strategy coordinator for the Hillman Marsh Conservation Area Restoration Plan. I work for the Essex Region Conservation Authority, and we're working on this project in partnership with Environment and Climate Change Canada. So the Hillman Marsh Conservation Area is located here in Leamington, Ontario. It's on Point Pelee foreland, and it's just a few kilometers north of Point Pelee National Park, and it is part of the Carolinian Canada region. It's an extensive shallow marsh, and before breaching, it was separated from Lake Erie by a 1.5 kilometer long eastern-facing barrier beach. It also has 2 controlled wetland cells, where water level management is undertaken to create a 50-50 ratio of water to emergent, submergent, and floating wetland vegetation. And we have drawdowns every 10 to 15 years. And in the past, this has resulted in a 30 to 48% increase in vegetation cover. So Hillman Marsh has been subjected to limited sediment supply for decades because this area is so heavily developed and armored. Mainly the Wheatley Harbor, its attached jetty, and offshore breakwater have collectively trapped 525,000 cubic meters of sediment from reaching the downdrift shoreline. However, since roughly 2010, this sediment has been getting dredged from the Wheatley Harbor and deposited at the north end of the Hillman Marsh shoreline, which at least keeps it in the system, but it's not putting it back in the natural sediment pathway. But this sediment will be important in restoration efforts, which I'll touch on more later. But all to say that adequate sediment supply is essential in maintaining the resilience of barrier beaches against wave activity and storm events. So in 2016, 2017, rising water levels initiated the rapid expansion of a breach. And by 2020, the breach expanded significantly to almost 500 meters. And the marsh was no longer protected from the forces of Lake Erie. The years of 2019 and 2020 also had near record low ice cover and record high water levels. So those conditions combined with a lack of sediment supply resulted in the rapid expansion of the breach, as well as the realignment of the spit to where it is now, which is 250 meters landward of the rest of the shoreline. So the stability of a breach has been determined to be dependent on 2 things, which is consistently strong waves and weak longshore transport. So in this study, breach recovery is compared in 2 environments, both a natural shoreline and a human modified one. So roughly 7 kilometers south of Hillman is East Beach in Point Pelee National Park. It's also an eastern-facing barrier beach that experiences similar weather and wave conditions. However, it's responded differently than Hillman Marsh has. So at East Beach, barrier initiation and full closure was reported twice in 3 years following a similar cycle each time. And the graph here is showing observed breach widths against water level. So first, the breach is initiated in response to water levels exceeding the elevation of the barrier, which is usually due to a storm event. And then even though water levels are increasing, the breach width does eventually start to decrease because sediment is available and transported along shore from the adjacent shoreline, and also due to the limited storm activity in the summer. So you can also notice here that some wave-driven transport does go directly through the breach, which causes a spit extension landwards. And this actually makes the beach wider in that section. So when it does come to the beach being fully recovered, this area is wider and now more resilient to future storms. So like in this first photo, this was in 2019, and the breach was mainly here. And then once it was recovered, this area was now wider. So when it came to the next season, that in the new breach, it opened in the narrow area of the beach, which is where this was in 2021. So going back to the graph, water levels drop, further decreasing the size of the breach, and either further seasonal or long-term decline in water levels fully close the breach. In this case, the breach decreased to about 9 meters wide and stayed that way over the winter. And then in the following June, so it was from 2021 to 2022, the breach ended up being reported closed by park staff the day after an easterly event. So the assumption here was that offshore sediment was transported into the breach. So it's reasonable to expect that under natural circumstances, Hillman would also follow this cycle. Natural being a barrier beach without coastal structures. However, the limited availability of sediment led to the wave-driven transport through the breach being stronger than the alongshore transport, which resulted in the rapid opening. And once it was basically an open embayment, any sediment it did receive was going into the marsh, which made the barrier extend instead of closing the breach. And now a narrow, swash-aligned barrier started to form. So while the breach at East Beach was recovering, the breach here at Hillman exhibited little to no recovery. So this is both plots together, so you can really see the difference in the magnitude of breaching between the two sites. So to recap, despite their proximity and similar histories, the response and recovery of the two breaches diverged after 2016, and the primary difference is the hardened shorelines to the north and south of Hillman Marsh. Hillman Marsh has seen dramatic nearshore downcutting due to increased storms, rising water levels, a decrease in winter ice, and also because we fixed the position of the shorelines. And this kind of makes matters worse now as there is less wave dissipation, which is accelerating erosion. And as we're losing more of the beach and marsh, we're also experiencing a decrease in native biodiversity, and certain species are losing the foundation of their existence. For example, species like the common hop tree and scarlet ammonia have been wiped out because they were located where the original barrier beach was, which, as you can see in this photo, is not there. And the remains now are fragmented and more vulnerable to predators, invasive species, and less viable for wildlife populations, including the hundreds of species at risk that Hillman is home to, and the hundreds of birds that Hillman is a migratory resting area for. So climate change poses various threats to Hillman Marsh, namely lake levels projecting to increase in variability, which means we'll be experiencing more extreme highs and lows, and both will alter the species that are found within a wetland, and of course, a decline in biodiversity. Warming air and water temperatures will reduce winter ice cover, which is what protects the shoreline from extreme storm events because the ice prevents sediment loss from wave action. The absence of ice can also leave some shoreline properties more vulnerable to flooding. An increase in the frequency and intensity of storms can lead to an increase in sediment and nutrient runoff, which will or can result in water quality impairments like eutrophication and algal blooms. And this increase in storms can also cause coastal structures to breach. Specifically here, as I mentioned, the controlled wetland cells are protected by clay dikes. And also in this area, the Road 1 dike protects the Road 1 dike, which is right along here, that protects the low-lying surrounding area from flooding. So really quickly, the Road 1 dike, it was built in the early 1900s. At the time, just a road and a canal, and then over the years, a dike was added, and it went through various improvements and upgrades as water levels rose and we experienced more storms and rainfall. And there were several instances of a dike breach or severe storms, but the real damage was in 2004 after a significant amount of rainfall occurred in the area, and it was pumped out quickly, which caused the canal to fail, and then the road went into subsidence. And this led to the closure of over 2.5 kilometers of that road, and to this day it remains closed. So as of now, the dike is unstable from both sides, with the instability of the road on one and wave action coming in from the other. It can't sustain itself, and it has an increased probability of failing, and the failure would result in extensive inland flooding, again, due to the low-lying nature of the surrounding area. And then with the nearshore area between the breach deepening, waves are coming in larger, and they're coming in towards the direction of the dike. And again, it's not made to withstand these conditions. And with climate change, the lack of winter ice cover and the increased storm events will just make this worse. So this leads us to our project. So we have 3 main goals. First, to restore and enhance the barrier beach to withstand climate change extremes, protect the wetland ecosystem, and safeguard homes and businesses. The second is to restore the wetland plant community behind the barrier, and then to make Hillman Marsh accessible to all of society and future generations. So we have a steering committee of around 20 experts that are offering feedback and expertise to help us develop this plan and reach these goals. So I have some conceptual sketches from Zuzek Inc., and they've been used to explore a range of options for the barrier, which I'm going to go through sort of quickly, but I just want to reiterate that they're just concepts and drafts, and they're not necessarily the final concept, and we still have knowledge gaps to fill, like existing water quality and potential restoration constraints before we finalize anything. Our one priority, though, is to improve the hardening of the south headland, which is here labeled B. Right now, there's just a bunch of rocks placed there, and they were placed on an emergency basis, but not much thought went into the design, so this area needs to be addressed so we can anchor it down and prevent further erosion. But this will also be the root of what will be an artificial or hybrid barrier, and will include a sloped berm that should hopefully help with down cutting. And then the main barrier feature, and the one that looks like a beach, is it's going to be a hybrid approach. So the sediment would lay on a rock core, and the rock core would act as a last line of defense. So worst case scenario, if a storm were to wipe out the sand, there's still some sort of wave dissipation, and also something for the sediment to return to, so we prevent it blowing out again. And this beach would rely on the sediment dredged from Wheatley, as I mentioned before, but we'd still have to make a sand nourishment plan and something that is just a bit more effective. So we use the sediment effectively. This concept A, features a high crested barrier that would not allow for overwash, but it does have a permanent outlet in the barrier for water exchange and fish passage. And then once the barrier is in place, that would make way for marsh restoration, which includes planting submerged aquatic vegetation and creating potholes for fish refugia and habitat islands. So this is concept B. It's kind of similar. The only difference is that this concept has a low crested barrier that would allow for overwash, in addition to a fixed outlet. This will also have less vegetation, since more sand will be getting deposited along the back barrier. And the barrier would be less expensive, more dynamic, but it would be harder to maintain the vegetation, and it would need more nourishment. And lastly, concept C, similar idea here, also low crested, but the outlet is wider and it's aligned with the existing breach channel, and it kind of makes use of existing bathymetry. But this, because it's wider, could result in more wave agitation. So this is just the cross section of the rock core concept by SJL Engineering. It's just a structure for the sediment to rest on. So for worst case scenario, storm does damage, there's still a place for sediment to return to. So the top here, this is the idea of a high crested barrier that would not allow for overwash. And then at the bottom, it's low crested, and as you can see, there's a wave overwash zone. So we are still pre-launch, and research and data collection have been ongoing. So bathymetric surveys are done and water quality monitoring is ongoing. We have a sensor station, that's what you see on the screen. It's getting continuous readings of turbidity and temperature, and then we're going out every 3 weeks to get discrete measurements of pH, dissolved oxygen, specific conductivity, and total suspended solids. But right now, our biggest thing is that we're starting community engagement and consultation. So we already have the project announced and have like a website and a feedback form up. But in the next few weeks, we'll be holding 2 public consultation meetings. And then within the next year, hopefully we'll be able to do those interim improvements to the South Headland. So to conclude, this barrier has crossed the tipping point, and the once sheltered marsh is now a semi-sheltered embayment of Lake Erie. And without immediate action, the variety of habitats which support marsh, shore, field, and migratory birds and hundreds of species at risk will be lost. And then not to mention the threat of a dike breach that could displace many people and create millions of dollars in economic damages. So we are working to try and address the issue. And that is it for me. I'll take any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jenny, for sharing this case study and all of your project concepts with us. I know those images of the expanding breach at Hillman were absolutely shocking to me. It is a really interesting site, and you've outlined that really well in your presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
If anyone has questions for Jenny right out the gate, feel free to add them into the chat or raise your hand here and unmute yourself. But I'll kick it off with a question that I have for you. So Jenny, are there any citizen science type activities that are ongoing with respect to data collection, like water quality or sediment monitoring, that are either in place or maybe that may be in the works in the future?
Yes, there's a citizen science effort through the University of Windsor's Coastal Research Group called COSTI. They have stations set up on several shorelines throughout the area, and there is going to be one set up at Hillman Marsh, but figured we would wait until it's actually set up and kind of somewhat restored. But that allows citizens to go place their phone on a little stand and upload photos of the shoreline, and then the research team will do what they have to do and kind of align it properly and georeference it, and then that helps us see how the shoreline is moving and how it's eroding, or after storms, after whatever.
Tracking changes of the shoreline?
Exactly.
Very interesting. Thank you. I have one other question, but I'll go to this one from Enda first. So Enda's asking, was non-intervention or retreat considered as a possible strategy?
Like a no action scenario, that is technically our 4th option. So ideally with what we're doing after public consultation and steering committee meetings, we are going to go forward to the board with the preferred option. So yes, no action is a 4th option. It's just it'll probably it's not preferred in my opinion. The way the beach is now, it's not going to recover itself, and the dike is not built to protect that entire area the way the beach was. So if we leave it to that, we risk another dike breach, and of course, all the flooding that can occur, all the people's homes and businesses that will be lost, as well as just all of the habitats that we are already losing. So,
Right.
so it is technically an option, but
it's in one of the concept plans.
Yeah,
definitely. We do have another question from Neville here. So Neville says, really cool concepts. Have you guys had a chance to look at order of magnitude cost to implementing them? They seem like quite large construction projects.
I don't think so. We're not there quite yet. I think there's, I mean, at least not that I'm aware of. There may be estimates, but we're not there just yet.
Yeah, concept choice maybe is in the first stages, and then the cost evaluation.
Yeah.
Fair, definitely needs to be considered. We do have a question more so if you could point out the dike in your concept plans, that would be appreciated.
So this is, I'll go to the first concept. Right, can you see my mouse?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So this is the Road 1 dike. It's just right south of the Marsh, and after it breached in 2004, it's from this area all the way to here that has been closed, and it's not safe to drive on.
Perfect. Thank you for showing us that again. And if there's any other questions coming through, I have one last one, but I don't want to take the floor from anyone in the audience having a question. I see one coming up. Will ongoing beach nourishment be part of the long-term maintenance plan of these design solutions? And if so, do you know how magnitude and frequency of the nourishment actions? Do you know the magnitude and frequency of nourishment actions that will be required? And if not, why? A couple of questions in that one.
Okay. So right now, the sediment that's dredged from Wheatley Harbor right now is done by Wheatley Harbor and Small Craft Harbor, so it's not necessarily something that I'm a part of, but as I believe it's dredged as the canal starts to clog up with sand. So yes, it is going to be a part of these plans. It's going to be a really important part of the plan. But what we want to do is think of a more effective sand nourishment plan and something that would make better use of it. Because right now, it's still a really good thing that all the sand is getting deposited. But it kind of just sits there and it doesn't really move along the beach. It just kind of piles up. Some of it's lost to Lake Erie. Some of it's just it's still a good thing for sure to have the sand in the system. It's just not a part of the natural sediment pathway the way that it is now. So we would definitely need to rethink a new sand nourishment plan, but the magnitude and I think it was cost
frequency.
Or the frequency is not, we're not there just yet, but that would absolutely need to be reconsidered and redone before anything is done.
Right. Thank you. I hope that answered your question there, Jared. We have another one for you, Jenny. Would you inform listeners about the vertical drop between wetland, lake water level, and the adjacent farmland?
Yeah. I don't actually know if I do have a picture I can kind of show. So basically the entire the Leamington area surrounding the marsh and below it is all below lake level. And so it's like farmland and then the dike and then the water level. So if that dike were to breach, it would cause a lot of inland flooding. I believe according to Zuzek's reports, we're looking at $50 to $100 million in economic damages if that did happen. I'm just going to share my screen again. These are older photos, but this is from here to the left is all the farmland. There's homes, businesses, a lot of farms, because that whole area was a part of these 4 drainage schemes that were built. It was all marshland and it is now all agricultural land. So it's all below lake level. And then we have the dike that is the only thing protecting.
There we go. Sorry, Jenny, you cut out for just a second. It might have just been me.
It's okay.
Continue.
So we just have the farmland and all the homes are all below lake level right now. This is where the dike is above it. And then the marsh and lake level are all not on par with the dike, but could be if it came to higher water levels. Did that answer the question?
I think so.
So
if there's any follow-up questions for Jenny, feel free to put them into the chat. But just for the sake of time, I think we're going to move on to our very last presenter. Thank you very much, Jenny. And thank you again to Pete. Scott, if our microphones are working well, then I'm going to pass the floor over to you for our last presentation of the day.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
All right, technology. So a little bit of a different project here from the first two, but I guess bear with me. So I'm just going to speak to you now about a physical modeling studies that we conducted for a Scarborough Waterfront project, and I'll just point out here that our partners on this were Shoreplan Engineering. So a little bit of background. Obviously, the Scarborough Bluffs are really an iconic.
Sorry to interrupt you, Scott. I don't think you're sharing your screen there.
Yeah, that would help. 1 second.
There you go. Looks good.
Perfect. Yeah, so the Scarborough Bluffs are an iconic feature of the Lake Ontario shoreline. There are some regions now, though, that have very limited accessibility in terms of their number of access points. There's, hazards along the waterfront, various sections that are just not formally accessible by the public, as you can see there in the image. So really, the Scarborough Waterfront project is really aiming to create a system of naturalized spaces along at least this reach of Lake Ontario, and really trying to balance, waterfront revitalization with enabling public access, and also incorporating, natural heritage, natural hazard protection management. So here we have just a kind of a view here of the site. So we have this existing Bluffers Park Marina, which has been here since the mid-19th century. And there's the Bluffers Beach up here, which is not that large, but it's very, very popular in the summer. So it gets very jammed with vacationers. And we have this kind of this entranceway here into the marina. So we'll speak about that in a moment. And then the Meadow Cliff is the kind of the next little reach along the lake here. I'll mention that in a moment. So really, our kind of this phase of the project that we've been dealing with is really about almost a 2-kilometer reach. So first of all, in terms of the design considerations, there's a lot of sand buildup that happens in that existing navigation channel. So the sand beach that we just pointed out there, it's really at its capacity for retention of sand. So the sand is moving along shore and accumulating in the harbor entrance, which results in unsafe boating conditions. And right now, the City of Toronto is dredging every year or two to try to manage that risk in the meantime. The beach itself, especially under high water levels, is really subject to a lot of flooding. Large areas are becoming saturated with water, which can really create an undesirable user experience. You can see some of the big puddles here in the image. The existing aquatic habitat along this stretch of shoreline, it really lacks diversity in terms of the substrate and the shoreline profile. And it's really supporting only a very small number of open coast fish species. And in terms of the trails and the terrestrial habitat, there's a lot of existing degradation, a lot of trampling of vegetation has occurred here. The trailways are very fragmented because there's no real formal managed use here by the public. So you can see it's kind of a mess. And then the risk to public safety, right? So some people have been trying in the past to walk all the way from Bluffers Beach, which would be over to the left of the image, over towards Meadow Cliff on this side, and you can see, depending on the water level here, there's really no access. So this bluff toe is continuing to erode over time, failure of the slope and landward migration of the crest, and it's really putting people at risk if they're trying to get between those 2 points. And just further as to what I just said there, really the lack of access, right? People are wanting to get from one side to the other, and it's just not really possible to do that safely. So in terms of the proposed coastal works, then there's, for at least again for this reach of the project, first of all, we'll have a large expansion of the existing headland. So the headland now at the entrance to the marina ends somewhere about here. So this is a large expansion. And then this existing beach is much smaller at the moment. The existing beach line is probably about here. So a significant expansion of the beach, and that'll partially be accomplished by expanding on the headland at this eastern end here. So I'll speak a little bit more about the two projects that we did here. So first of all, on the headland itself, so again, trying to promote sand retention at the beach and also at the same time reducing the need for dredging of the harbor. It will provide a significantly larger recreational space. So the idea is this is, full of pathways and, nice benches for people to sit on, enjoy the views of Lake Ontario and of the bluffs themselves. And it provides a lot of natural habitat as well. They'll have a cobble beach in here, and, obviously a lot of natural habitat. There will be an improved shoreline accessibility through the use of a paved, separated, multi-use recreational trail, accommodating both pedestrians and cyclists along the beach. And there would also be a formal paved trail from the parking lot out to that new expansion of the headland. And then again at the eastern end, an expansion of this meadow-cliffed headland. The existing headland is kind of limited to this section, so be a significant expansion here. Again, trying to promote sand retention over the long term, creating more space for the visitors that are coming to sit on the beach. And then this interim groin here will be constructed to, again, help hold on to the sand and promote kind of natural sand recovery over time. And this section of the beach here will be covered with a cobble gravel mixture, whereas it would be a traditional sand beach further to the west. And then in terms of the aquatic and terrestrial habitat, obviously this will provide greater movement and improved access for terrestrial animals, increased opportunities for expansion of sensitive beach habitats. It'll be a stopover habitat for migratory birds and butterfly species, and it will provide improved underwater habitat for a wider range of fish species. So the study objectives then were really to conduct a series of physical models that were required to verify the stability and the response of these proposed shoreline developments under a wide range of different design conditions. And wherever possible, these physical models would help to optimize the various design elements to try to improve their performance and help to lower overall costs. So first, we'll talk about the Bluffers Park Headland expansion model. So first, this was constructed in the NRC's 30-meter long by 36-meter wide multi-directional wave basin. And here you can see a kind of a photo here of us recreating at 1:30 scale the proposed headland expansion and the surrounding lakebed bathymetry. So these templates here are being used to recreate the lakebed floor at the project site. And then here we have the kind of the completed bathymetry at the site, and then we have kind of the footprint where this expansion of the headland is going to go. So then proceeding to actually building the headland itself. So we had numerous cross-section templates that were used to help us faithfully construct and recreate that headland expansion. And the alignment and elevation of each one of those templates was very carefully surveyed and installed to make sure that everything was done according to the plan. Again, the cross sections here allowed us to reconstruct this headland with a very high degree of accuracy. And we used 7 different classes of rock materials to represent the different materials that were proposed to be used for the actual construction. And wherever possible, we tried to use, construction techniques to really mimic the real world. So in this case, all of the armor stone on the outer layer of the expansion here, all the armor stone was placed by hand, mimicking a one-by-one process that would happen in real world as well. And then finally, for the finished structure, we obviously used paints to help us not only distinguish different classes of rock, but also to help visualize the motion and any damage that may occur to the structure as a result of the storm waves that we'll see in a moment. And so just to give a sense of scale there, the width going across this expansion is just over 300 meters. So quite a range of instrumentation was used here on the project. So a number of wave gauges to evaluate wave heights at different points within the basin. And you can see we also have 2 overtopping measurement systems here. These are just kind of some buckets essentially that are going to catch the water that comes over the crest during these large overtopping events. We also had a Faro laser scanner here, so we could take a 3D scan of the entire structure and recreate that again to evaluate the change in the profile over time. And also we had damage analysis cameras So by having a number of fixed cameras all the way around the structure, we could take pictures before and after, and then you could kind of recreate images like this, which can help easily identify, okay, maybe there's some areas here that need to be, improved, or okay, maybe we're just seeing a few stones overturning, and really the stability of the structure is fine in those locations. So really helping to identify where damage is occurring and where where the design may need to be tweaked a little bit. In terms of the testing was done over 3 different phases, so 3 kind of significant rebuilds of the structure, with over 100 different individual test segments. So here we see, a particularly large storm event happening, also in combination with a high water event, and you'll see some overtopping events happening here in the video. And again, the purpose here was, again, to optimize and verify the headland design elements and try to make sure everything was kind of well suited for the day-to-day conditions, but also the extreme conditions that the headland would face. Moving on now to the second model, so of the Meadowcliff headland and also the Eastern Beach region. So again, in the same basin, just following the first study, in this case, the model scale was increased slightly to 1 in 25 scale, and again, you can see here that we're recreating the bathymetry at the project site just a little bit further up the shore. And this is what it looked like more or less when the hardened structures were in place. And we're here in this photo just getting ready for the preparation of modeling the mobile bed, the sand beach. And again, you can see roughly the sense of scale here for the distance where this beach is kind of working out. In this case, we used 2 different gradations of mobile sediment to recreate the actual mobile bed in this region of the model. So first of all, the native beach sand that is already there at the site was represented by a fine sand, roughly 0.2 millimeters in diameter. And then we also had the proposed beach fill, which again was like a gravelly cobble mix. So in our model scale, that was represented using a coarser sand with a D50 of roughly 0.6 millimeters. So these 2 sands were the native sand was placed underneath, and then the proposed beach fill was placed on top, and we observed what happened to the mobile bed. Again, a wide range of instrumentation, including the wave gauges. We had some current meters to evaluate the speed of the water moving around the model, and the ferrolaser scanner. And again, in this case, we used a total station to conduct surveys of the shoreline, so to evaluate the change in the profile, the change in shape of the shoreline itself over time. And you can see we've also got the marker flags there. So before and after every test, you can put a different colored marker flag just to kind of visually give yourself a reference of, okay, well, the shoreline was here after before this test, and now it's moved to some other location, either in or out. And similar as before, again, 3 phases of testing, over 100 different individual tests, again, through a wide range of day-to-day conditions to extreme storm conditions like we see in this image here. Again, trying to optimize the shape of this crescent-shaped beach here, and also all the other design elements. So the design of this groin here, and the headland on this side. And again, trying to ensure everything's kind of well suited for the conditions that it may face. So just in conclusion, these model studies generated a very large quantity of valuable information that ShorePlan was able to then use to further the designs and try to optimize and support the detailed design of this structure, and ultimately obtain the permits that are going to be required for construction. In terms of the project timeline, detailed design is kind of getting underway now, and I expect to hear that this project is going to get a green light in the fairly near future, maybe in the next year or so, with construction to happen in maybe the next 4 or 5 years. I'm not sure how long it'll take. There's various stages to the whole project, but yeah, that's where we're at. So I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you very, very much, Scott, for sharing this project and all of the model construction plans and testing that have gone on so far. We do already have a couple questions in the chat, so I'll start with the first one here. It says that you mentioned that the purpose of the headland is to keep sediment at the beach and expand it. Approximately how much sediment have you modeled will be trapped within the beach versus how much sediment is naturally transported along shore? Follow-up to that is, do you foresee this trapping of the sediment affecting any local areas, and is the beach expansion necessary in your opinion?
Yeah, so I guess going back to the first part, so there will be some expansion of the beach. I believe they would bring in some material for the kind of the recreational beach, just to expand that. Again, I haven't been there myself in the summer, but apparently it's jammed. So I'm sure the local community appreciates having a larger beach there, and then kind of the expansion of the headland would be to kind of accumulate over the long term, try to accumulate a little bit more over a gradual process. So hence there's the need to install that kind of gravel cobble beach over a section of it in the near term, and then over time that would just gradually form into a greatly expanded sandy beach. I'm assuming that our role on this was really to kind of evaluate the design in terms of its kind of structural stability, so to speak. So our modeling didn't take into account what would happen further down the shoreline. I can only assume that shore plan and even the design work that would have been done by the Toronto Region Conservation Authority prior to this would have looked into some of those details. So I can only assume that yes, that's been thought of.
I was muted. Thank you very much for answering that, Olivia. I hope that answers your question there. I'm going to move on to our next question from the chat, which is, Scott, would you comment on the permitting process and the associated implications with infilling and fish habitat alterations?
Yeah, I'll have to say my experience there is quite limited. That would really be something that Shore Plan, who are our partners on this, they're really the consulting engineers. So that would really be more up their alley to be responding to. But yeah, I guess our role as the testers of this thing, really trying to evaluate it, we don't get too involved in the actual policies and procedures there.
Right. Thank you. I have a question actually. So, and this again may be kind of outside of the scope of your specific role in the project, but I appreciate you trying to answer it anyway. There is a clear social aspect to this project with the need for safe access and recreation areas. Were there any, or are there plans for any community interviews or workshops in order to gain feedback from the community on what those needs specifically are?
Yeah, I believe there's been quite a bit of public outreach. I think if you go to the TRCA website, I think if you search Scarborough Waterfront Project, I think you should easily find this one. There's lots of public information about what the designs are at this stage. There was, and I believe they had like a whole bunch of posters and things that were put up around the site for people to kind of for people who are accessing to kind of learn what are some of the the dangers and risks at the site and what they're proposing to do about them. So I believe there was quite a bit of community outreach in that regard.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We have another question for you. So Pete is asking, who will fund the construction of the project?
That's a good question. I'm not too sure on that. Presumably, this is a City of Toronto project, so presumably they, the taxpayers are heavily on the bill here. There very well may be, federal government support for this as well, but that's a detail I'm not too aware of.
Great, thank you very much, Scott. Are there any other final questions for Scott? And I suppose at the end, we can open the floor back up to questions for any of our speakers today. We had 3 really informative presentations today from Pete, Jenny, and Scott, despite our technical difficulties at the beginning, which I'm glad we overcame. If there are any last-minute questions for our presenters, feel free to enter them into the chat. And again, if you think of any questions over the day, or we'll share the slides with you and the recording with you, if they come to you in the end, you're welcome to send us an email and we can forward it to our presenters. And when they have time, they can respond and we can always share that with you guys again. And I suppose to just reiterate, look out for a follow-up email from the Great Lakes chapter specifically for talking about our short-term, medium-term, and long-term objectives for our chapter. That's our next stage as an executive committee. Executive committee is to nail down what those look like for our future and to share them back with everybody once we kind of have a handle and we've refined our objectives that we talked about during our very first COP meeting in February. And if there are no, oh, we have a question, just kidding. So from Jared, I believe this is going to be for Scott. Do you happen to know the rough overall material volumes associated with the project? So like X tons of armor, Y meters cubed of gravel, sand, etc.
Not off the top of my head at full scale. I could probably work it out pretty quickly from how much material we used in the model scale construction and kind of scale that up. But I'm sorry, I don't have that at the tip of my tongue.
No worries. Thank you. I do see Enda has their hand up. You're welcome to ask your question.
Yeah, thanks, Brianna. If Pete's still on the line, Pete, I was just curious with the resilience plan, and one of the key aspects of that, I guess, is having this sort of lake resilience governance committee, or I can't remember what you called it exactly. But so I guess how would that be formed, or do is there a champion on board to sort of start to do that at a lake-wide level? Or I'm just curious, as because that would be great, I think, right, to have a sort of a lake-wide committee to oversee this.
Yeah, well, and I can tell you what's been discussed, and of course, again, affirming that's not my decision, sort of how that plays out, but we have some mechanisms in place in the Great Lakes Basin already. We have the Canada-Ontario agreement, which is between the federal provincial government, and that's where they agree to implement aspects of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, the binational agreement. And so one of the conversations has been about striking a subcommittee or a subgroup to that piece of infrastructure we have already, that type of cooperation we already have from the provincial federal government. And that would be a home potentially for a lake resilience committee, council, whatever you want to call it, a form of governance where we can coordinate the types of actions we need to see at that smaller littoral cell scale. So those are been discussed. Lots of things still need to be figured out, but that's one of the mechanisms that we think that could be implemented without big major structural changes. Or we're not looking at not that we wouldn't want to have, say, a brand new Coastal Resilience Act in Canada, but we don't have something like that to drive this. So trying to build onto existing structures, I think, would be our first option.
Very interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for the questions and all of the answers from our presenters today. I'll give it another throw if anyone has any final questions for our presenters. And if not, then I will just give my sincere thank you again to all of our presenters today for taking the time to share their individual projects. And thank you to everyone here today who was able to take time to come to our COP meeting. Again, you can look out for further communications from us, from our email, and as always on our LinkedIn page. If you're not already there, you can find more updates from us more frequently on LinkedIn. And thank you again, everybody. I'll leave you with 10 minutes of extra time for your day. Much appreciated. Bye, guys.
Thanks, Brianna. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Bree.
Thanks, Jenny.
Great job. Thanks. Bye.